It's so nice to see lots of familiar faces on our webinar today. Well, not faces actually, but familiar names. Lots of new names too. So for those of you that, perhaps haven't attended any training sessions or met me at any kind of events previously, then a really warm welcome to this session today. One thing I also did notice is that we have a section of the group, which is perfectly okay, that don't work in the recruitment sector. So I think when it comes to challenging conversations, the structure is the structure. So it doesn't matter if you're having a challenging conversation with a partner, with a child, with a colleague, with a candidate, with a client, with a customer. It doesn't really matter what industry sector that you work in. So the structure is the structure. So it's perfectly okay that you join us today. But just bear in mind, we're probably going to be talking a lot about recruitment specific examples. Today's session is the first in a series, which I'll talk to you about at the moment. But today we're going to focus on having challenging conversations. So over the next 4 weeks, I'm going to be releasing content that I think is really valuable for our industry right now. So first of all, today we've got challenging conversations. Next week, I'm actually going to be looking at stress and resilience. After that, we're looking at nurturing relationships, which I think, given the current climate, that's probably one of the things that we can only do right now until things start to go back to some kind of normality. And then the final part is recruitment in recovery. So I know from knowing some of you that are on the call today in terms of how long you've been in the industry for, none of us have lived through a global pandemic, but there's many of us that have lived through economic downturns, global financial crisis, recessions, etc., etc. So there's certain things that businesses can do to help the recovery after this is all over, and it will be over. We'll go back to some kind of normality in some kind of form at some point in the future. So how do we adapt to that? Now, I don't like the word pivot. I think it's hugely overutilized right now. And from a pivot perspective, if you're completely abandoning what you're doing and what you know and then moving into a completely different direction, it's pretty much like having a startup business in a new market that you're not in. But if you can utilize your candidate base, and you can utilize your client base, and you can utilize your network to actually offer a different service or offer a different value, then fair enough. But recruitment in recovery is really looking at how does our industry take steps to recover from a recession. In this particular session, we're actually going to look at what makes a conversation challenging. Now, I've been delivering this kind of training for many years, and the purpose of this training really was to share soft skills around challenging conversations that might be, giving a candidate feedback that's not welcome, or backdoor placements with clients, or clients that refuse to pay certain fees after you've done all the work for them. So I never in my wildest dreams did I think that we would be creating a training session with regards to a global pandemic. But you see, the thing is, a challenging conversation is a challenging conversation regardless of the circumstances. There are different emotional elements that are involved and logical elements that are involved when we're in crisis, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But the structure is the structure. And as I said earlier, even if you don't work in recruitment and you're not having challenging conversations at work, these skills are enabled to facilitate conversations with other people in your life. Grab a pen and paper if you don't have one already, and we'll work through that process. We're going to have a look at what has the potential to derail a conversation, because sometimes conversations can go south real quick just by certain things that we say or do. And then we're going to have a look at the 7-step structure to allow you to manage the exchange as smoothly as possible. The last thing we want to do right now, when it's all about nurturing relationships, is to engage in a challenging conversation where it's not a good outcome. Because if it's not a good outcome, then it potentially can have a real big detrimental impact on the relationship when the market starts to recover. And, when we're thinking about putting our focus into our personal brand, our reputation, our relationships, how we nurture those, how we become the first person that someone wants to come to when they start to hire again, if we're not facilitating these conversations with compassion, empathy, and a high level of kind of soft skills, then it's really easy to alienate those types of conversations. So this 7-step structure will help you kind of plan to have those conversations. I know some of you that have attended some of my sales training in the past, we look at how do you actually plan to make sales calls? How do you actually plan to deal with objections? How do you actually plan to make sure you always get some level of commitment and keep moving that relationship forward? This type of conversation is no different. We need to plan how we're going to facilitate that. So the first thing that I'd like to acknowledge before we move into anything else is that, it's perfectly normal for all of us to feel sad, stressed, confused, scared or angry during a crisis. And it could be part of our parts that we play in the conversation that impacts on the outcome of that conversation. So it's not necessarily the person that we're having a conversation with, it's what we're bringing to the conversation ourselves. So first things first, before we look at anything, is your own mindset and your stress levels will directly impact on your ability to have challenging or difficult conversations. So if you're having thought processes that aren't serving you well at the moment, if there are some negatives that are happening for you personally, and I suspect that might be the case with some people on the call, because there's not one of us that isn't impacted by this in some way. If you are going into the conversation with a high level of stress and a high level of emotion personally, then the kind of emotional brain takes over, which shuts down our logical brain. So if there's anything that you need really to take care of for yourself for the moment in order for you to have these conversations most effectively, then that's the first part that you need to start at. So from a self-reflection point of view, it's really important to consider, where are you sitting right now? What are the things that are causing you some stress? What is something that can have a detrimental impact on the conversations that you're having with other people? So are you making any assumptions? Now, we all know the expressions of what assumptions makes, but let me shed a little bit of a different light on that. I've got my old business partner is an NLP master practitioner, and he used to always say to me, "Are you hallucinating?" Because I would talk about something that hasn't happened yet. So, and we've all been guilty of it, right? We've all had moments in our life where we've hallucinated or made assumptions about a conversation that we need to have. We sometimes might even go to the extent where we practice what we might say. So we expect the other party to respond or react in a certain way, and then we're going to say this and we're going to respond and react in a certain way. And we make the call and we have the conversation, and it is nothing like we expected it to be. So when we're sitting in that hallucination phase and we're making assumptions, if we're going to hallucinate, I guess my advice is, if we're going to hallucinate, let's hallucinate some good shit. Let's not hallucinate the negatives of the conversations that we're about to have. Are you having any buttons pushed personally? So if you are feeling a particular way about a conversation that you're about to have, is there something there at play for you? Because if there is, maybe you need to address that first. Does your attitude to the conversation influence your perception? So when you're actually looking at your attitude about how it can influence and your perception. So, certainly post GFC, I did a talk for the RCSA, and it was really around looking about different types of behavior. So different types of behavior of different types of recruiters. So, they might have people in their businesses that are doomsayers, and that's the people that focus on the negative news, focus on the negative figures, and focus on the fact that there's certain negative things that happen within the industry. And what our brain does subconsciously is it actually deletes and distorts and generalizes information, because we have millions of messages that are thrown at us every day. So if we have a perception, it can actually influence the conversation towards not having the best outcome. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about how we can maybe turn our thought processes and our mindset around a little bit and take it away from any negative connotations that we are hallucinating or making assumptions about. So what are your needs and fears is the next point. You know, we all have needs and we all potentially have fears. And we're going to look at the categories of what can make a conversation challenging in just a moment. But what are your needs and your fears? Are your needs being met? And are you talking about your fears? So just from a mental health perspective, you know, if there are any of you that are kind of looking at needs and fears at the moment as something that's going to be able to enable you to have better conversations with people, then, you know, there's lots of support and advice that's available now. And I would highly recommend that you do that if that's the case. I actually ran this session about 3 weeks ago with a clinical psychologist who was a guest presenter on the call as well. And we were doing that to teachers in a teaching environment, basically. And we were talking about their needs and fears. And she suggested that, you know, the government do have this ability to have 10 free mental health sessions. You just need a referral from a doctor, and you can do that through telehealth now. So if you feel that there's something at play that don't allow you to have these conversations at the moment, then we need to take care of that first. And can you control or influence the outcome will directly impact on the conversation that you're having as well. Because if it's completely outside of your control and there's no way that you can influence that, then the outcome is always going to be the outcome. It's the way that we facilitate the conversation that will make the difference. So I'm going to only touch on this just for a moment. I know some of you that have been to some of the self-psychology type work that I've done in the past will be well aware of thought pattern interrupt. But I just want to bring this into the audience that's on here today. I don't have time to go into this particular topic too much because it's almost a session just on its own. But I would really recommend that if you feel that you're having some thought processes that aren't quite serving you at the moment, Google thought pattern interrupts. There are lots of resources, there are audio books, but basically TPI is a technique that was developed by a hypnotherapist called Dr. Milton Erickson. And this is actually being used quite widely in cognitive behavioral work and neuro-linguistic programming. So with cognitive behavior, what we're actually looking to do is change our behavior through cognitive functions and changes, and NLPs through language that we use to change our views on certain things or our perceptions on certain things. So thought pattern interrupt actually intertwines in both of those. And it's a 4-step process. So I'll just quickly tell you what those 4 steps are, but I would highly recommend, if you feel like you need a shift in thoughts before you can actually facilitate conversations with other people, is really think about identifying what those thoughts are. So the 4-step process is 1, identify the thought that does not serve you right now. If it's disruptive, if it's negative, if it's affecting you in some way, identify what that is. Number 2, actually think about how you can change that thought process to a thought process that serves you. So what we actually want to do is interrupt the thought process. We don't want to keep thinking that same thought, because what happens, the more we think the same thought, the more hardwire it becomes. So what we're actually doing is we're creating these synapses that become deeply buried into our conscious, our subconscious. So what we want to do is interrupt that by going, oh, I've just had that thought. I need to change it to something that serves me better. The third part in the process is to actually have a physical gesture to snap you out of the thought process that you're in. So you might decide to stand up. You might decide to go for a quick walk. Stress bands, hair bands, I don't have a hairband on today, but hair bands are actually quite good just to give you a little bit of a flick to the wrist, which causes a bit of pain, which stops the thought process. Doing jumping jacks, doing push-ups, any kind of physical gesture that helps you kind of break away from the thought process that you're in and move you into a different space. And the 4th part in the process is to practice it. So we all probably know that it depends on, Nardine, yes, you know about the rubber band pain. We've done that in workshops face-to-face before, haven't we? So it does hurt and it does stop the process. So when you thinking about trying to identify any thoughts that aren't serving you right now, is you have to practice it. So 21 days, 28 days, you know, whatever research you believe in terms of how long it takes to form a new habit, if there's a concerted effort over the next 3 weeks for you to say to yourself, this thought process isn't serving me, I'm not doing the best thing by my candidates and my clients, myself and my business, how do I turn this around a little bit? And then you kind of just keep identifying those thought processes as you get them. Try and replace them with something that serves you better, and then actually have a physical gesture to snap yourselves out of that. That's like a really quick crash course on TPI, but I would certainly recommend pop it on your pad, thought pattern interrupt, go and have a look at some resources. Now, let's have a look at what topics are usually difficult. So broadly speaking, if we were going to do this webinar, let's take a global pandemic out of the webinar and let's look at the recruitment sector and the types of conversations that we need to have. Broadly speaking, these are the types of topics. So if we need to give someone constructive feedback, that can be a difficult conversation. If there's a conflict between personal needs and work needs, it can cause some challenges. If we need to deal with customer complaints, if we need to deliver bad news, and delivering bad news is probably a large portion of what we do. Yes, we change people's lives and we put them into roles, and there's so many positives in a lot of what we do. But if you think about the average job fill ratio might be between 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 or 1 in 8, in certain industries at the moment, then we're always delivering more bad news than we are good news. So that's a big part to play in what we do. Conflict between people, when emotions are running high, stress-related concerns, and nervous about the outcomes. So when you think about a general average day in recruitment, we could have challenging or difficult conversations about many of these things, right? We could probably tick off 2 or 3 before lunchtime in terms of the types of conversations that we have. But when you look at a situation that's in crisis, you may potentially be having many more conversations that tick a lot of these boxes. In fact, you might have one conversation that could tick the majority of these boxes. We have to be highly aware of that. When we're starting to talk about people's health, their security, their livelihood, their financial security, the impact on their families, there's a much deeper layer of what makes these conversations difficult for us right now. So when you actually look at those topics, let's take it away from what the topic is and actually look about what is it within those conversations that can make them quite difficult. So if it's an uncomfortable topic, if there's uncertainty of what to actually say, if there's uncertainty of the outcome, there's so much uncertainty around so many things from a day-to-day basis, and things are changing very quickly. If we have different views about how things should be handled, what the outcome should be, there are hugely massive different views around all sorts of things that are happening. I'm not going to try not to focus on COVID-19 too much, but this is what we're faced with at the moment. If it's an emotional situation or if it's an inflaming situation. So I think when you look at the topics and you look at what can make those conversations difficult, we're pretty much right in the thick of this, and we have been for some weeks now. So what I would like to do is get some feedback from you, because, it's not just you. Often I know that some of you are on the call are sole traders or, business owners, and there's only a couple of you in the business. And it's good to hear what other people are experiencing and going through. So I'd invite you all to write a comment in the chat box for me of the types of challenging conversations that you are faced with at the moment. So not going into too many specifics, but just what is happening for you in your industry sector, on your role, in your area, with your client base, with your candidate base. What are some examples of the types of challenging conversations that you're having? So we've got finishing temps up, trying to be positive. Candidates with mental health problems, there's a huge rise in that. Mostly stress-related and people feeling uncertain across the board, having to cancel bookings. There's some in the Q&A, yes. Oh, Georgia, I was just sorry, I wasn't laughing at you challenging conversations. I was just laughing at Elizabeth saying hallucination, some good stuff. Um, Redundancies and stand downs, always a horrible conversation to have. Conflicts between personal and professional problems, reduced hours, candidates who have lost their jobs after a short period of time, and candidates we have placed that have been let go, clients who have to let go staff. People want to know when it will change, looking for substantial topics of discussion when business is not great, as in now. Yep. You know, George, that's something that's going to come up in the last webinar of recruitment in recovery. Turning down many candidates as there are so many good ones out there for one role. You know, we've seen a real shift in the market now, haven't we? You know, we've it's quite cyclical. I think, those of us who have been in the industry for quite a long time know that we work through cycles. You know, it can be candidate rich, candidate short, it can be a client's market, it could be a job market, there could be different swings and roundabouts that come into play. And it's been a fairly buoyant market for some years, and lots of access to candidates now. Lots of access to jobs and not necessarily candidates, but now we've kind of swung to a candidate market. Clients reporting that they've spoken to every single recruiter in town in the past week because we've all been on the phone getting close to our clients. Yeah, candidates who say, please help me in the circumstances when you can't control or influence that outcome there, Lindsay, no. Oh, sorry, Jorge. Sorry, my apologies. But thank you for correcting me. I won't make that same mistake again. Uncertainty about contract extensions, pressures on clients to advise. Thanks there, Michelle. Yeah. So you can see there's some real strong themes here, right, in terms of the types of conversations that you're having, laying off temps, uncertainty around the future. Those types of examples actually play right into what makes those conversations difficult. And when we look at what makes conversations difficult, we operate from two different parts of our brain. So we have our logical brain and we have our emotional brain. So one trick to really think about is what is the language that your clients or your candidates or So, but just a bit of feedback from someone else that's on the call is if you get everyone to tick the panelist and attendees box, we can all see the chat. So if you wanted to share your comments publicly, then other people will be able to see them as well. So going back to this from a good technique is to actually really think about what is the language that I'm hearing. So do I have somebody that is very emotionally charged, using emotional language, the behavior or language, whether they're crying, whether they're upset, whether they're frustrated, whether they're angry, whether they're disappointed. You can really tune into those emotive-based words. And if you tune into how they're actually communicating with you first, it gives you some idea of where they're coming from. Are they coming from their emotional mind, or are they coming from their logical mind? So when someone's coming from their logic, they'll probably say, yes, look, I've had a look at the website. I understand, perhaps it's JobKeeper allowance. And, there's a large portion of you that deal with temp and contract. So you may have people that go, look, I've checked out the website. I've looked at the details. I think I qualify for this. Can you advise me on that? It's a very logical exchange. So when we're communicating with someone that's coming from a logical space, it makes much more sense to actually communicate back with them logically. When someone's coming from an emotional space, it actually shuts logic down. So it's quite difficult to actually bring the logic to them if they're sitting in that space. So what we need to do is have strategies where we can deal with different types of conversations, whether they're logical or whether they're emotional. If they're logical conversations, let's mirror that. If it's an emotional conversation, let's not mirror that. But what is the key thing that we need to do if we're having a challenging conversation that is emotionally charged? What is that one thing that we need to do? Just one word, one thing. So we've got slow it down. If you had to put a one word on it, what would we need to show or demonstrate? Support, calm, empathy, love it. So Yeah, we've got to absolutely acknowledge that. We're going to have a look at that in a moment, Lizzie. Certainly, compassion. I think when you look at something like this, empathy is so important when dealing with these types of conversations, because it can derail them real quick. But compassion is probably what the world needs right now. I don't know if any of you saw the post that I put on LinkedIn yesterday. It was a blog around something that's kind of big on social media at the moment, which is we're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. And it really resonated with me. So I wrote a little bit of an article on it and posted it to LinkedIn yesterday. But we're all experiencing the same storm, but we're all having our own experiences in it. So what we need to do is have a little bit of kindness, a little bit of a compassion, and a lot of empathy, even if we don't agree or we feel that their comments are justified. So the things that can derail conversations real quickly is a lack of respect. And that might not be that you're showing a lack of respect. That could even be just a lack of perceived respect. A harsh startup is another one. Now, a harsh startup is actually something that's used quite widely in couples counselling. I know this from being on a call a few weeks ago with a clinical psychologist, that when they look at couples counselling or couples therapy, if one of the couples has a harsh startup, it can actually just completely derail a conversation before you've even started it. So a harsh startup might be how you immediately respond or how you bring a subject into somebody's attention. So, for example, I might say, "Gosh, I'm so annoyed that you did blah blah blah," or "Why didn't you do this?" Or it's the first time I've started the conversation or initiated it, it was harsh. So that's going to derail a conversation very quickly. And I'm not saying any of you would do that, but it's one of the points in terms of derailing a conversation. Stonewalling is another one. So we might have the facts, they might have a different set of facts. And if you kind of like brush their facts off with your own and stonewall them, that can actually make the conversation really inflamed really, really quickly. An inappropriate sense of humor. Now, with this particular one, we could potentially just be innocently trying to shed some light on a conversation or try and just diffuse it a little bit, and it might seem like a really innocent behavior, but if something that you think is slightly amusing or hilarious or put a light side to the conversation, it could actually be quite offensive to the person that you're talking to, because they might see that as a perceived lack of respect. Stress and emotions. So if you've got somebody that is coming from an emotional space and they're highly stressed, that actually has the potential to derail the conversation very quickly. So don't feel obliged to continue with the conversation if somebody is highly stressed or highly emotive, or even bordering on potentially rude or abusive. You don't have to have those conversations with them at that moment in time. You could tell somebody that, can you give me 15 minutes and I'll give you a call back, or let me just have a look into this, and I don't feel like I'm prepared to have this I'm not prepared enough to have this level of conversation with you right now. I'll call you back within the hour. Don't feel like you're forced into these conversations with people. As I say, when the emotional mind is charged, the logic kind of shuts down. So if we give them an opportunity to emotionally diffuse that a little bit and come back to that, we can talk a little bit more logically. It won't always work, obviously, but that's something that's potentially you could look at. Laying blame as well. If someone's coming to you and has a problem and they play part in that problem, actually telling them their part in that problem is actually going to derail that conversation too. Lack of empathy. We've talked about empathy. Huge, massive in these types of conversations. If you start to get a bit defensive, so if you've got somebody that is coming from an emotional mind and maybe a little bit attacking, and you defend and you become defensive in that exchange, it's never going to be a good outcome. Not accepting their attempts to resolve the situation. So if you've got somebody that's like, they do have a complaint or they do have an issue or a concern, and they've come to you with the solution, if you dismiss that solution, then they'll feel like they're not being heard. Even if it's not the correct solution, we should still be present and allow them to actually share their point of view. Overwhelming them with negatives. If there's some TPI that needs to happen here in terms of switching some negatives into a different type of language that's more supportive and more and supports you and the conversation better. And making promises you can't keep. Lindsay, absolutely, active listening. We're actually going to get to that in a moment. That's one of our 7 points of how to actually facilitate the conversation. So you're about a few slides ahead of me on this one. So thanks for that. Making promises you can't keep. Okay, so we've already said in the comments that we have certain situations where we can't control the influence, we can't control the outcome. So if we're making promises that we can't keep, then that's going to derail a conversation very quickly. The only thing we can really promise is our own action in a situation. So if we promise that we're going to send an email, or if we promise we're going to call somebody back, or if we promise something that's an action from us personally, that's pretty much the only thing that we can promise. Anything else beyond that we can't control or influence, if we're starting to make promises about the fact that we could potentially look at this or we could potentially do that, then the next conversation that you have with them when that wasn't possible will derail the conversation completely. So we've already discussed whether it's coming from an emotional mind or a logic mind. Empathy is what will underpin all of this. So let's look at the 7 stages. Now, I will send you these slides so that you have these for future reference. The recording will also be available, but I will send you these slides if you wanted to make a note of these as we walk through them. Just bear in mind, these are the types. This structure is applicable to any conversation, not just with clients or candidates, any kind of challenging conversation. So step number one in any challenging conversation is never to let your own feelings spiral out of control. If you respond emotionally to an already inflamed conversation, the conversation is going to escalate really quickly. So sometimes if you know the conversation that you're going to have can potentially be quite difficult or challenging, depending on the circumstances, you might want to prepare for that. So we're not hallucinating, we're just preparing for the fact that I know this is going to be a tough call for the person that I'm talking to. So keeping calm, one of the things that is going to be your best friend is potentially deep breathing exercises. Now, I know this is a little bit holistic, but it's something that when, there's a huge body of evidence that the calming effect of deep breathing has on us. So I'm going to share a technique with you called the 4-7-8 breathing technique. And this technique is actually used to help calm the body, calm the neurological system, and actually helps people that have anxiety deal with anxiety. So what you need to do is take your tongue and you turn it round. Probably can't see that, but you turn your tongue around onto the top of your roof behind the back of your front teeth. So you just curl it around like that. And those of you that want to join in with me, let's have some breathing on here now. But what we want to do is put the tongue up, breathe in for 4, hold our breath for 7 seconds, and then breathe out for 8. So let's just do 4 cycles of that. It's probably not best to do more than 4 because you might get short of breath, but let's do 4 cycles of that. So in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. One last time. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. Now, did anyone do that with me? And do you feel any different? In the chat box. Did anyone just do that with me? Yes. Can you feel any difference? I did say it was holistic, Bernard. I did. But it's a well-researched and well-supported relaxation technique. And it's actually really good to help go to sleep at night. So apparently, if you lie in bed and you do 4 rounds of this, it really enables you to settle down into a much deeper sleep much quicker. Okay, last point on number 1 is remember not to take people's behavior as a personal attack. So again, when we're talking about people's livelihood, their jobs, their income, their security, their health, their family, they are going to be frustrated, sad, angry, and stressed. And quite frankly, actually, over the last couple of days, I've really noticed a bit of a rise in negative behavior through social media and a lot more trolling. And, there's a lot of anger that underpins that. And there's people that are upset that people have made negative comments about them or attacked them in posts and things like that. And it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable at all. But you can't take that personally because it's a reflection on them, not us. So number 2, we have to acknowledge their feelings. And that's something that you've all said, well, not all, but some of you have said in the chat box already, we really have to acknowledge their feelings. Because if we don't, then we have an opportunity to actually inflame the situation more. What we can't do is actually say to them, I know how you feel, because you have no idea how they feel. We can't possibly understand somebody else's brain, their feelings, their body. We're not mind readers. Everyone else experiences this situation in their own way. So we can't use words like, I know how you feel. All right, but we can actually point out to things that they may have said or words that they've used. So here it says, I can hear this situation is frustrating for you. So what we've said is, I can hear that you're frustrated because you just told me that you're frustrated. So what we're actually doing there is layering in empathy as well as acknowledging the thought process. Then we go, I know this is a sensitive topic and that you're worried. So they might have said, look, I'm really worried. And, there's some sensitivity around this thing. We're still not saying, I know how you feel. We're actually drawing cues from what they're already actually saying to us. And we're acknowledging that. And then we've got, I understand this has caused you real stress and concern. So it's not saying I understand how you feel. It's you understand that it's caused them stress and concern because potentially they've told you that it's caused them some real stress and concern. Now, number 3 is wait for calm. Now, calm won't always come. However, if you demonstrate some patience and you wait it out, and you don't attempt to argue with them and just allow them to say what it is that they need to say. So, for example, when I do sales training and we look at objection handling and things like that, you never interrupt somebody when they're halfway through an objection because we're making an assumption of what they're objecting about, and we make an assumption that we know the answer to that solution. In the same token, we should never interrupt somebody when they're trying to tell us something that's challenging for them. If we actually interrupt what they're saying and don't allow them just to let it out and let them share that with us, the tendency is that they'll go back to the beginning and tell you again because you interrupted them. So at no point is any logic going to break through if they're coming from an emotional mind. So let them get their feelings off their chest. Don't interrupt them. Avoid telling them to calm down because that's the worst thing that you can do because it's extremely patronizing and it will have the exact opposite effect. If things do escalate, just suggest taking a breather. As I say, you don't feel obliged that you have to live out this full conversation. You have every right to stop the conversation and come back to it when you're both more able to do that. So if you can exercise some patience, not in all circumstances, but if you can, then it can potentially help the situation to calm down some. Now, Lindsay, you said active listening. So in point number 4, so after we've acknowledged And we've allowed them to just share with us the situation. During that process, we need to fully listen to what it is that they're trying to tell us. So from an active listening perspective, we have our ears, we have our eardrums that sit inside our ears. Everything is vibrational. We can hear noises, we can hear sounds, we can hear words. From an active listening perspective, we want to truly listen to what they're saying. Verbal and non-verbal, emotive words, the language that they use, never interrupt them. When they've actually finished talking about what it is that they need to share with you, ask some questions to clarify your understanding. So, is it a case that, I understand that this is causing some frustration for you. I want to understand that a little bit more. I want to understand that a little bit better. So what you're telling me is X, Y, and Z. Is that correct? So what we're actually doing is going, okay, I hear you. I do hear you, and I do understand you. That's a real deep way of actually demonstrating more empathy, and that you actually do listen and you genuinely do want to understand their point of view. Paraphrasing is also a great way from an active listening perspective. So if we've got people that are using certain bits of language about how they feel about situations, if you use the same language back to them, that shows a real deep level of understanding. Obviously, we're not going to use bad language or negative language, but if there's some words in there, if they go like, I'm so disappointed about this situation because of this, when you paraphrase back, look, I understand that you're really disappointed, and I understand that is a situation for you, then we're actually showing a deep level of understanding, rapport, and we're listening. So if people feel like they've been heard, then that can also create calm very quickly in a conversation. Number 5 is finding common ground. So if you can establish that you've got things in common, it can help generate feelings of empathy and understanding. So what you don't want to do is be at loggerheads in the conversation with opposing opinions. So the way that you can kind of diffuse that a little bit and actually bring you both to the same place that you need to be is actually find common ground. So you might say, I know we are both eager to find a mutually beneficial solution to this. Or you might say, I know we're both keen to get these delays resolved as fast as possible. We both want to get the best results from this situation. Let's make a plan that works for everyone. So what we're actually saying is, I understand, I've listened, I've let you've had your word. I know we both want to figure this out. That can help actually facilitate a much calmer conversation, because they feel like you're not opposing, you're actually trying to work together on that. Now, number 6 in the process is to establish control of the conversation with facts. So if you are finding yourself in an emotionally charged or inflamed conversation, or something that's just a little bit difficult, it's really easy to get off topic. So you might actually find that the person that you're having conversation with is starting to talk about irrelevant details or going off topic. And the conversation can derail quite quickly if we're actually going off topic and not talking about what the current circumstance is. So if we can go back to fact, if we can go back to details and keep control of the conversation, then there's a much lower likelihood that it's actually going to go off track. Now, with this one, it's probably, there's an art between taking it back to fact and not trying to be logical with someone that's being emotional, or not derailing or stonewalling or dismissing someone's solution. So there's an art around how we bring that back. So by finding that common ground and then paraphrasing what someone said earlier allows you to go back in time to the conversation to reestablish it there and try not to let it go off in too many tangents. Now, the final part, step 7, is always end with a plan. Always. With any meeting, any phone call, any conversations that you have, if it's inflamed, If it's emotionally charged, if it's difficult, if it's challenging, try and think about what can you do to confirm what you've discussed with them so that they're happy with the resolution. This is what we've discussed. This is the resolution. If you can't find a resolution for them, if everything is out of your control, then the time frame for you to be able to come back to them is going to be key here. So if you have no answers for them, you know, the JobKeeper payment, for example, is a massive example for those of you that are on temp and a contract desk at the moment. What is the definition of a regular worker? Are they eligible for the JobKeeper payment? Is it Fair Work that they need to go and talk to? Is it the ATO that they need to have conversations with? Who is actually in charge of what this means? If you don't have the answers to that right now, if you're kind of dealing with the RCSA and the ATO and APSCO and kind of in between all of them, and you don't have those answers yet, perhaps you just need to put a time frame in place where you will come back to them with what you know. Not necessarily the answer, you will come back to them with what you know and when you will come back to them. If we don't meet that time frame and we don't actually communicate that time frame for them, you can bet your bottom dollar the next conversation that you're going to have is going to be much more challenging than the first one that you had. And when we're looking at resolution, if we can resolve on first call, if it's within our control and we can resolve it, that's always going to be the ultimate output, because the longer an issue goes unresolved, the bigger the issue becomes. So step number 7, confirmation, time frame, resolution. Now, I've got a summary slide here, which I'll send through to you all. So just to summarize, we need to show empathy, keep calm, acknowledge their feelings, wait for calm, practice active listening, find common ground, establish control of the conversation with facts, and end with a plan. Now, oh no, that's in the wrong order. We've got a few minutes left. Now, I know that's really kind of overview. There's only so much you can cover in a 1-hour webinar when it comes to these soft skills types of topics. And, you know, under normal circumstances, we would have opportunities to role play these types of conversations. But I'm happy to stay on the call for as long as you want me to, actually. If any of you want to have a little bit more of a deep dive around the conversations that you're having, or ask the other attendees their advice on situations. You know, I'm not running the entire show here. There's a lot of experience on this call. So if you've got any specific questions or comments or contributions or your experiences, spend a few minutes doing that. I think we all need a little bit of community right now, don't we? So in here we've got empathy is about connection, communicating you're not alone. You need to reach inside yourself to be empathetic. Absolutely, Karen. What a beautiful way to put that. Thank you. I'll just go to the Q&A box. See if we've got any in there. While we're actually thinking about whether you'd like to contribute, or whether you have any questions, or whether you want to share any views, let me just go back to a little bit of what we're going to be discussing in next week's session. So I've been training resilience with recruiters, I would say for a good 10 years now, because resilience is the key that underpins everything that we do in recruitment. You know, if you don't have resilience in recruitment, you don't have much of a career. So again, I didn't think in my wildest dreams I would actually be repurposing this content to actually think about what resilience looks like in our current climate, and actually stress management techniques as well, because not all stress is bad, but some stress is really damaging. So the session will be around resilience techniques, how to build. We'll do a questionnaire on how resilient you currently are, some techniques on how to create an action plan on how to become more resilient, and actually look at a stress management structure on how well balanced your life is at the moment, and some actionable things that you can take to actually manage stress a little bit more effectively if you feel that's impacting on you there. Sorry, I'm just going back to the chat box now. Thoughts on having a challenging conversation that is unexpected, that you've had no time to prepare for? So Lizzie, do you know, I think it's just really thinking about the 7 steps. You know, there's not much preparation that you can do for many conversations apart from prepare yourself. So if you're kind of comfortable across, you know, keep calm, just listen, show empathy, don't interrupt, try and find some common ground. If I can't resolve it now, let me figure out a way to do it. Like if you become really comfortable with just the structure that allows you to not hallucinate what the conversation will be, not to over prepare for these types of conversations that you need to have, but you're just comfortable with the structure. And then if you're stuck on step 3, you're waiting for calm and there's no calm coming, then you're well within your rights to potentially end that discussion and make a time to have that discussion at another time. Because it's not going to actually solve anything if somebody is not being calm in a situation with you. So it doesn't look like we've got any more questions. Oh no, hold on. And we have, in the Q&A box, we've got questions. So how to deal with a difficult conversation surrounding false information given to the candidate initially surrounding reimbursements. Basically, they were told they'd be getting money back, but that was incorrect. So I'm assuming that's something to do with, oh no, I'm not going to make any assumptions about that, but you know, there's certainly a lot of that's happening. You know, I'm working with a business at the moment who has thousands of contractors that work for them, and we still don't really have a definitive answer on what is classed as a regular worker for their JobKeeper payment. So they're literally having hundreds and hundreds of calls every day from candidates that have gone onto the ATO, have spoken to Fair Work, and they believe that they should be receiving that payment. Again, it links back to the structure. So you understand that that's the situation. This is the information that they've heard. You try and find common ground, that it's something that you're experiencing with multiple people at the moment. Let's go back to the facts. Let's discuss what those facts are. This is, you know, things are changing on a daily basis. It's not even, a lot of it is not within our influence or our control. So you can only give them the information that you need to give them. And if you want to delve into that a little bit more deeper, Lorraine, I actually have some additional content that I'm happy to share with you around how to deal with first response conversations around people that are basically calling in that are irate, aggravated, or dealing with a conflict situation. So today's really more around the conversations that we find challenging to facilitate, but I can certainly share some ideas. So reach out to me afterwards and I can share some information on that. Do I believe that saying that we can't control the situation, but we can control how we react to it? Do you think we can apply it to difficult conversations? Absolutely. The 7-step process is exactly how we react to a situation. And we need to check our own mindsets first. So if we're going into, you know, if we do that self-reflection, am I going into this with my own perceptions, or I'm emotionally charged, or I have a negative kind of standpoint for a certain situation, then you're not controlling the way that you react to it. So there's a certain level of self-assessment and self-awareness that needs to happen there first. So I definitely suggest that, you know, a TPI situation would be something, that thought pattern interrupt would be something to delve in a little bit deeper there. Okay, next one. How do you follow up a difficult conversation if you feel it didn't go well, especially with video conferencing being hard? You can't read body language, bad connection, didn't express yourself well enough, etc. Do you know what? I actually think a little bit of just transparency with that, Karen. You know, we're all human, every single one of us. Some transparency around, you know, following up, you know, how do you feel about that? What's the outcome for you? I really want to make sure that we did achieve the best outcome. So if you link it back to that common ground section, where I'm from a common ground, you both want the best outcome. going back and having a level of vulnerability and transparency around the fact that you just want to make sure it was the best outcome because you genuinely, sincerely want that for them. I think a little bit of just being human with people about the situation goes a long way, you know. If you've got a client it's the same if you've got a client maybe you don't feel you did your best work for. You know, we don't avoid having a conversation that we don't feel we did the best work for them. Let's just be a little bit human about that. You know, what was their perception of that? How do they feel about that? You know, what kind of outcome were they looking for? What would be a better solution for them in the future? You know, these are really honest, raw kind of conversations that you can have with people. And certainly Lizzie that's on the call today was actually saying to me a couple of days ago when we had a catch up that that clients are actually sharing much more personal information about them. You know, we have insights into each other's homes now. We're all kind of a little bit more relaxed about all just being human and being in this same storm together. So thank you all so much for joining me. I will send you the resources, the recording, and a link to the next one, which is resilience and stress management. So if you have any questions that come up between now and then, we'd like to have a discussion about any specific scenario that you find yourself in. I'm here. My contact details are on the emails. So you can call, text, email, LinkedIn message me. But I really am grateful that you came and joined our session today. So enjoy the rest of your day.